Hey, I'm Di Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. We're a platform that showcases and celebrates the strength, resilience, and achievement of women from all walks of life. So in each episode, I pose questions to my guests that peel away the layers to reveal the knowledge and wisdom that shapes their narrative. So if you're feeling unseen, unheard, or simply looking for inspiration, then the Power of Women podcast is a great place to join the conversation. Today, we're going to unpack trust, respect, and self-confidence. And my guest, and as you can already see, is one of the coolest and smartest people I know. She may look like the lead guitarist in a rock and roll band, and in fact, she is a talented muso. However, she is also a highly sought-after thought leader. So now joining me today on the Power of Women podcast is Dr. Desley Lodwick.
Well, hello, Di. Lovely to be here.
Wonderful to have you. Let's start the podcast.
Let's start.
Desley, where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in a small country town in Queensland. Can you hear my accent?
Yeah.
Hang on. Can you hear my accent?
Yeah.
I grew up in Rockhampton, and it was such a... I'm really pleased that I grew up there, small country town.
Yeah.
Well, not that small, but small.
Probably was then.
And had an interesting childhood, you know. It was fun, but it was also different, very different than Melbourne.
Mm. So what was the most powerful learning from that childhood?
Well, I think the learning, as I reflect back as an older woman, which I am now.
We are.
Yes, we are.
Collective now.
Mind you, I feel such a privilege to be growing old, I have to say. It's interesting to be growing old. There's an element of wisdom that comes with that I'll humbly place upon myself.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing I learned was we can survive. It was a funny place. It's the beef capital of Australia.
That's right. Big feedlots, huge land holdings up there.
Yeah, but I had a lot of freedom in one sense as a child. I remember Mum saying to me, "Now, Desley, you make sure you're home by 6 o'clock for dinner." And I could just go out in my push bike and just ride around for hours.
Yeah, safety wasn't the concern like it is today.
Oh my gosh, no, I did some unsafe things.
Yeah, and you're still here to tell the story.
I am. I guess not everybody is, but I am. Yeah.
And I love what you said about embracing the growing older, because I feel the same. It's just, this is the best time of life. I'm loving it, and I can tell you are too.
Yes. One of the things I find myself saying often is, your best is yet to come. There's so much that we can let go of that occupied our thoughts when we're younger that you just got to give up on now and just go, oh, yeah. That's fine.
But you kind of just get comfortable of who you are. There's no apology, and that's what I just love about this age. It's like take it or leave it.
Yeah, yep. I really believe my best's yet to come, which is why I've started up a new business, and I'm looking at this to be the most influential business that I've run, I think.
Yeah, I love that too. Yeah. And that's Aberrant Learning.
Yeah, that's Aberrant Learning.
Yeah.
Aberrant Learning, which is all about different, deviant.
We'll get to that because I know that word comes into play somewhere else.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So, Desley, let's start with Desley the Muso. How important is music in your life?
Well, it's really important, but I haven't played since... My last gig was just when COVID started.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Because you were a regular
I played
performer.
in a couple of bands. Yeah. I played in a couple of bands and, this is not an uplifting story, but here we go. My last gig was in, I think, March 2020 when
and the world closed on the 13th of March in Australia.
Well, a few hours after I got home from that gig, we called an ambulance.
Oh, no.
Yes. And I ended up in the Alfred Hospital in one of the COVID rooms.
With COVID?
No, not with COVID. With pneumonia.
Oh.
But it was really interesting. And I haven't played since, but I'm just really busy doing my business. And my husband, I go to all his gigs.
So you're surrounded by music in your personal life, whether it's yours or
and we
husband's.
have a studio at home, and the bands that my husband's in, which is quite a few actually, they rehearse at our studio at our home, and I just consider it their gigs for me. Yeah.
They're playing for me.
Yeah, that's really nice.
And you're still dressing like you're ready to go to the rock.
Oh, well, you just don't care anymore, do you?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think you care. I think you care a whole lot. I just love the whole look and feel of it. It's just so you.
Well, ditto it, you guys. I mean, we've always been a bit like this, haven't we?
We have a bit.
Because I've known you since the early 90s.
Is it that long?
I think so, yeah.
We met each other in a corporate setting where it was all terribly stitched up, but we kind of grated against that a little bit, I'm thinking.
Oh, I never fitted in. I never fitted in.
And you never wanted to.
No, and since then, that was the last job I ever had. I think I've been...
You've run your own business.
Yeah, I've been unemployable since then. And I say that meaning that if I was to be employed, I would do a really good job.
But you just wouldn't toe the line, which...
Oh, it's not so much... So, look, let me put it this way. Global financial crisis, someone said to me, oh, aren't you worried being in your own business? I said, no, I've got lots of clients. Aren't you worried being in your one job?
Yeah, good answer.
Yeah.
Well, good response.
Look, I jest about being unemployable. It's not that at all. It's a matter of I get a cross-section of what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
I have clients from all over the world. During COVID, my major client was a US company, and the upside of that was really interesting. We helped them shut down a plant. We helped them get out of Russia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we helped them do quite a few things, but the downside of it was my work was between midnight and 4 a.m.
I was going to say the global clock, as I know only too well, is not that friendly, but we do what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see a lot of issues in workplaces, and I see a lot of people doing their absolute best, really working hard and well-intentioned. But I just see that the systems that are in operation in many workplaces, which are the obvious outcomes in the way in which we run our lives, the world, the systems that we have in place. I'm talking about the larger systems here.
Yep.
And they are becoming less and less humanistic.
Yeah. Yeah, you lose the ability to express who you are. So, I mean, I follow that same point that you say about being unemployable, and it's not in the literal sense. I mean, people have sought out both of our skills over time, but we won't be dictated to how we might fit in, behave, present, and that's not always to everybody's flavour.
Di, have you ever thought of that as we're actually quite old-fashioned?
No, because that doesn't kind of ring as a groovy, edgy thing. Old-fashioned.
Let me explain. Remember, no, actually we can't remember, we weren't there, but think back, there was the baker, the farrier.
Yeah.
People worked from home.
Yep. The milkman?
Yeah, so people had family businesses like that was small.
Yeah.
And so that's rather old-fashioned. Isn't it wonderful?
Okay, I'm happy to be old-fashioned.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good.
I think we get businesses to a point where hierarchy and bureaucracy works against the humanism that we need to actually make the progress that we need.
Yeah.
It holds people into groups where people, in order to cope, become quite defensive. So that shows up as either passive behaviours
the
or
behaviours that
aggressive
go with that. Yeah,
fight, flight and freeze. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got a book due for release this year, and the title is brilliant. Please tell us about that.
Ethically Deviant. Yes, well, I had to put a tagline with that because what on earth would that book be about? Ethically Deviant. So the tagline is an unconventional guide for leaders to supercharge progress in times of complexity, chaos and change.
That's a bloody big book front to fit all those words in.
I know, but it was the first thing I did. Before I wrote anything, I had to get the title and the tagline together.
Yeah.
It's a leadership book, but it's also about we actually need to be quite different. We're dealing with complexity most of the time at lower and lower levels in organisations. And interestingly, and this just plays out over and over and over, the more organisations I go into, people don't understand the difference between complicated and complex. They don't understand that.
That's interesting. Where does that disconnect fall out?
Well, most of people's working lives up until 4th, 5th Industrial Revolution, which we're in now, I've lost count really, but have been where people's jobs were merely complicated. You could solve the problems around the jobs that they had to do.
Yep.
Nowadays, even frontline jobs are not merely complicated, they are complex, meaning that you can't solve them. So a little thing that keeps spurring me on is when I hear people who, let me say it, I think ought to know better, keep talking about solving problems that are actually quite complex. You cannot solve complexity. You can make progress in a direction you want to go. And the way you make progress in a direction you want to go is actually almost counterintuitive to how you solve a problem where there is a cause and effect. So in complexity, there is no cause and effect. It's more like the juggling water herding cats scenario.
So it's a shit just happens scenario and it's just how you work your way through it?
Well, there are patterns, but they're not the patterns of cause and effect. What you do is you work out what actions do you need to amplify that keep moving you in the direction you want to go. Notice I'm not talking about goals.
Yeah.
In the direction you want to go, and you learn your way through what emerges from, let's call them, safe to fail experiments. So meeting after meeting after meeting, when people think with cause and effect, they have meeting after meeting
trying to get the solution.
Trying to get a solution. So trying to predict, well, what if we this? This is why change management programs fail. They're treated as if they're cause and effect. They're treated as if you can control the variables rather than
learning to live with it and how you operate effectively within it.
Yeah, jump out of the little boat you're trying to sail the seas with and jump into the sea of chaos and learn how to swim in it.
Exciting chaos too. I mean, great things can come out of that if it's well managed.
Well, chaos, the whole point of chaos is nudge it so that you're actually nudging it back into, let's say, complexity where you can start to see some patterns of thinking and acting. And they're skills that when people learn them and what I do is I try and put people in positions where they just are actually partaking in an activity or an exercise where they just go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And when that happens, then you're on the start of people having a slightly different mental model about how to think about themselves. They tend to blame themselves less. What is it about me that I'm not making any progress? Or they tend to blame others less and understand there's no right and wrong in complexity, but there are ways forward. Because what's happening is, and you see this playing out in, dare I mention, politics. We won't go there, but dare I mention it. You see it playing out, the polarisation of political thought.
Yeah.
Whereas, because they're treating it as if there are solutions and problems that can be solved around how people live, etc. Whereas if you actually found a way that was this and that rather than this or that. But I'm getting into a bit.
No, but I can see you should actually be marching up the hill and giving some of these guys some advice.
Yeah.
Would you?
Oh, if they were open to listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, listening's not their best skill typically up the hill, but
I would love to vote for someone who says, this is what I've learned and this is how I'm continuing to learn, but who's going to vote for that person? That's the thing.
Yeah, everyone will go, that's wishy-washy. I'm not.
Yeah.
They haven't got a position and...
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what they stand for.
Yeah, and the political systems in countries around the world, so I'm not just talking about Australia, I'm talking around the world, they're just driven by power and money.
Yeah.
And not power of women.
Well, maybe we could start our own party.
Thought about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. So when we talk about chaos and change that we're facing today, and I mean, you know, every second week a headline and organisations facing poor behaviour, somebody being dismissed, harassment. But I mean, is that a classic example of chaos, or what are the sorts of things you're dealing with?
Well, chaos typically falls out of things that people think are simple and obvious, and something happens, and this is what's happening with the digital world, for example, and we just don't know how to deal with things that fall out of simple and obvious things. Is
that just lack of foresight of what could come?
Well, it's lack of understanding that there are some things we just need to keep an eye on, and they probably need to be revisited over and over. This stuff comes alive with examples, but the world is far more complex than people realise. But the upside, let's talk about the upside. The upside of complexity is, and a lot of people, maybe some of your listeners will have heard of VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous.
I feel I should know that, and I feel so naive that I don't.
No,
Can you say it again?
It's an acronym, VUCA. Yeah. And volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous.
Love that.
Yes. Now, the upside of all the stuff that's going on here, I'd have to say one of the upsides is volatility. And the upside of that for people like you and I, Di, is that small actions can have a massive impact. The upside of that is you can have a channel on YouTube, and you as you meaning your audience, as somebody who's got an idea, you can spread that idea
and start to populate it and seed it.
The downside of that is
anybody can seed a whole lot of shit out there.
So there are different responsibilities now. There are different responsibilities to do with insight and wisdom around where our eyeball energy goes. Yeah.
And that's something that pollies are grappling with now when they try looking at the age of access to social media and where their eyeballs go, and at the right time in their lives.
It's much easier to come across as strong with what I'd call old school strong ideas that are actually far less mature than the ideas whereby there is some grey between the right and wrong, where context is something people are taking notice of, basically.
When we caught up ahead of today's podcast, you said something that really, really caught my attention, and you said less than 10% of adults have the maturity or sense-making capacity to be effective leaders when facing complex challenges. Why is that?
That stat was from research conducted probably about 20 years ago, and there is more research being conducted around this same area. But I'm not on the top of that right at the moment. But here's how it holds together. With the increasing complexity that people at lower and lower levels in organisations need to face, you need to be able to make sense of it, sense of complexity. And if you look at, there's a framework called adult developmental theory. Now, all frameworks are flawed, all of them, but they're really useful. I look at them this way. So they're like, I'm going to put this framework on of adult developmental theory. Or in our last little bit of conversation, take the framework off, I was talking about a framework called Cynefin, Welsh word, Cynefin, Cynefin, fabulous. People are finding it really useful. So adult developmental theory, which has been around for a long time, but people find it difficult to talk about because it's all about adult maturity. But it's really coming of age now. No pun intended. Wasn't that funny anyway, was it?
Well, maybe it was.
So this is how it works. When you compare, and this is where some research has been done in the past and is continuing to be done by some notable researchers, when you look at the level of complexity in a person's job at particular levels and the level of sense-making capacity that a person has, it's less than 10% of people are able to make sense of what's required for being an effective leader.
That is an alarmingly low stat that says, we've got the majority of leaders out there making really poor decisions.
But that's no surprise.
90% though? I mean,
now,
I'm more optimistic than that. That's just...
Well, less than that. There are probably another 40-odd% of people who are making more effective decisions than less effective decisions. But the 10% is more of the most effective at best and still effective at worst. So you've got...
There's some scales in
There's some scales. And the other thing is, we're talking about a framework. It's all on a continuum, and this is all man-made so that we can talk about it. But you can see it in organisations where people's self-esteem is not encouraged, where self-esteem, the word self, let's take it out, or self-confidence, take it out, because you need to belong to a group.
Yep.
And organisational culture flavours how you feel about yourself. So we've got a lot of people who are young and people who are old whose concept of self is dependent upon their perceptions of what they think other people think of them.
And they're very different.
Yeah, the other side of it is, and it's nobody's fault, it's not, a 20-something-year-old is not lacking because they don't have high self-esteem or self-confidence in one sense. You don't blame a 2-ish-year-old child for not understanding what a shadow is. Yeah. It's a developmental stage. So we're talking about development here, not talking about stuff you can read in a book. You're talking about development.
So is that sense-making capacity is low when we're talking about our personal lives as opposed to leaders?
Our sense-making capacity, once again, we're talking about a construct through language about patterns within people. That's the best we can do, given that we're having a conversation.
Yep.
So people get their head around this adult developmental theory, and then you hold it lightly and try and just see through it as well. But it provides insight, and it gives you a little bit of support to access some wisdom. So
if it's only 10% ability to sort through complex issues in the professional sense, is it similarly low when we take that out of the workplace and take it into our personal lives?
Our ability
possibly lower.
It's possibly lower. Our ability, and I'm speaking generalities here.
Yeah.
We're all individuals.
Yeah.
But in our personal lives, where we are more subject to the opinions of others, we're subject to the opinions of people we care about, the people we love, we are a little bit more vulnerable. So our sense-making capacity can be hindered by, our bodies hijack us through our
reflex action
system.
To what people are thinking.
Yeah, our amygdala takes over. Our prefrontal cortex isn't quite.
So I told you're one of the smartest people I know. Do you get this? I'm amazing.
There are people doing a lot about this, though. There are worldwide groups of people. For example, there's the Inner Development Goals, the IDGs, which has got quite a following around the world, which I'm in early stages of being involved in here in Melbourne. And Inner Development Goals are all about what do we need to do to develop to be able to move forward given the massive issues that we're facing in the world. We're a species still in conflict all the time.
Yeah, I don't see that changing anytime ever.
We're a species who is muddying up our own backyards with the way we're a species killing ourselves with the food we eat. drama I'm raising here, but I think people catch on.
Yeah, no,
and
get
I
the
didn't
gist.
even mention climate change, did I?
Yeah, well, could have touched that fitted into any
Yes,
of those. So, yeah.
So there's people doing something about it, and there are people leading some large organisations with decision-making capabilities to make a difference. But the other thing is there are people within organisations, not in positional authority power, who are making a difference because of volatility. Remember, small actions can make a big difference and are making a difference within the small influences that they've got. And this stuff spreads.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the level of ability to make sense of complexity, and let's call that insight and wisdom. There's a lot of people around the world, myself included, doing our very best to work out ways to support the development of that younger than midlife, because that's fundamentally when it
kicks in.
The upside is we're living longer.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of people our age and more
who are going to be adding great ideas into communities.
I think our best's yet to come.
Yeah, I can tell why you say that.
That said, I'm also really impressed by an enormous number of younger people.
And isn't that terrific?
Yeah, I mean, adolescence is... Here's a one way to describe adolescence. It's normal to be quite self-centred.
Hey, I know a lot of self-centred middle-aged older people do, so that's...
Actually, a lot of people don't develop the maturity beyond the adolescent sense of self.
Ah, there you go.
And the thing is to remember that these are people we know, these are people we possibly love, they're family members, they're friends. But you put them in a situation where they have to understand complexity around dealing with people, other organisations. They'll really struggle, and they'll do damage not just to others but to themselves. Yeah.
Let's come back to that. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and have a deeper dive into trust, respect, and self-confidence.
Fabulous.
So, let's talk about self-confidence. What's the connection between self-confidence and that feeling of belonging and fitting in? Is it the same thing?
It's interesting it's the word self-confidence, because early in our lives we're sort of like we're written on by our parents, our teachers, our friends. We're written on. By that I mean they tell us who we are.
Okay.
And we believe them.
In case of my brothers, I might have actually been written on.
I am oversimplifying it, but we look for clues from outside of us as to who we are and whether we're valuable and worthwhile. And that's why a lot of people... Actually, that's the difference between, let's say, fashion and style. Fashion's all about fitting in.
Or it could be about standing out.
And I'd put that as style. But we're discussing probably the same thing here. Yeah. So I remember as a young teenager in Rockhampton.
Were you dressed like that?
Now, Di, I know you're younger than me, but do you remember
Not much.
Levi's shoes?
No.
Yeah, well, Levi's shoes.
Were they denim shoes?
They were denim shoes with a sort of I'm going to speak Rockhampton here, a brown sole with Levi stitching around the soles, up the sides of the soles.
It's a whole look that I missed out on.
Yeah, well, you can consider yourself lucky, I think. But I remember I didn't have a pair of Levi shoes, and I felt very insecure because I didn't fit in. I'm just giving you an example.
Mine was those horrible printed velvet skirts that had sort of patches that were wording, and it was a patterned velvet, and it was the most god-awful looking stuff that, of course, I wanted it because I didn't have it, so same.
Well, I'm sorry I missed out on that one myself. Yeah, that and Levi shoes would have been quite the style.
Well, they would have gone together beautifully.
That's right. So I didn't fit in because I didn't have Levi shoes, and my mum finally realised that it was having an impact on me and bought me some Levi shoes. And drastically overpriced, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we seek to be liked in order for us to feel okay about myself. In order for me to feel okay about myself, I need you to like me. Is sort of like the unconscious thing that's written
That's
on
a
us.
really interesting thing, because I would have personally agreed with that all of my life, but now I've got to the point where I don't need you to like me, but I would like you to respect me.
Yes, and there's a difference. And I suspect that people struggle to understand the difference between being liked and being respected.
Mm.
If you ask people to give a definition, they would be able to give the definitions that are different. But unconsciously there's this mix-up, and it's a defensive coping behaviour, because the fact that we exist today, Di, is because our ancestors existed. We've kept it going so far. Yep, that's right. We're the culmination of it all.
Yeah.
And if we didn't fit into the tribe or the group, we would die.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of your listeners would have remembered Margaret Mead finding a bone.
Yes.
Yeah. And the bone had a healed fracture, and that was a sign of civilization, because if somebody hadn't have looked after that person who'd broken their leg, they would have died. And so it was, our survival is due to the fact that we fit into groups or tribes. But then remember, tribes fought each other. That's part of where we were at. So we
still are.
socialise into groups. And that's where a lot of our issues today are based, in that we are socialised to groups, so that if you're not with me, you're against me. If you're not like me, then there must be something wrong with you.
And the point of common descent is still quite possibly the same thing it's been for all of time.
But we're living longer, and we now have the capacity to grow beyond those tribal ways of viewing ourselves. And that's when self-authoring steps in, where we author our own self.
That's interesting.
And that's a stage of development. I've got that lens well and truly on in this conversation today, Di. Not rusted onto it, but it's a framework to hang a conversation off.
So a young person wouldn't have the wisdom for self-authoring, presumably, or am I wrong in that?
Most wouldn't. There would be the odd child, well, let's say a young person in their 20s who may well be self-authored. Remember, we're talking titles and names here that don't exist, but there would be someone who might be self-authored because they've either had an extraordinary upbringing by really fabulous parents who have the insight and wisdom to understand a lot of things.
Or it could be adversity took them there.
Yes, trauma. And there is definitely wisdom from trauma, but boy, that's not the route you'd want to
go.
Yeah.
So you've identified that our need to be included presents challenges, particularly for women.
Yes.
What are some of those challenges?
Well, how we look. Yeah, how we look. I've been, as we know, Di, we've been alive since last century, well and truly. I've got stories from last century about...
It sounds so long ago.
I know, I love saying it, I know.
I've got stories from last century. People look at you and think, my God, you're 200 years old. Yeah.
Gee whiz.
So what are some of those stories from last century, Desley?
Well, I can tell you about my first ever job interview.
Please do.
So I did I guess you'd call it a double degree now.
Yeah.
And part of what I did was I did computer programming. I did computer programming for Fortran.
You don't look like a computer programmer.
I know. Anyway, I was the only female in the class, and I'll say this humbly because it's...
What was it, an abacus? Sorry, that was a bit rude.
No, actually, it's not that rude. I did year 12 with the slide rule.
Yeah, well, I had Cuisinart rods in
So
school.
did I.
Yeah. And people look at you now and go, what are they?
I had a slate and a slate pencil.
Yeah.
Oh, we weren't offing each other. I was little lunch slate monitor. Sorry, slate pencil monitor.
Is that right?
Were you?
No. I wasn't given responsibility quite so early, I don't think.
Competition does not become us, does it? No. So I did computer programming, the only female, and I topped the class.
Wow.
And I got something like 110%. And you might ask, how
do
that
you
possible?
overachieve? Yeah.
I think that people did so poorly that they actually graded up. They did something or other. So
they
more
moved the
people
medium.
Yeah. Anyway, and I remember standing in the breezeway at James Cook University in Townsville when they had, the printer paper with the holes on the side.
Oh, yeah,
That's how you
that
found out.
fed through that.
The dot matrix printer, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And I remember being there, and the results of computer programming went up, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'd come top because was such a passive female. Growing up in Rockhampton, I was very, very passive.
Self-confidence wasn't
no
dished
self-confidence.
out.
And I came top, and the man behind me said, if I'd known you'd have done so well, I never would have helped you.
Oh,
but I remember thinking
in that phrase, isn't there?
I didn't ask you to help me because he just kept helping me, and I'm like, I know this stuff.
Yeah, maybe the motivations weren't quite right.
No, there's none of that. No. He was a lot older. He was a mature age student. Who knows? I think he was a teacher who wanted to teach me.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking...
That's a really crappy thing to say, isn't it?
But the thing is, I didn't have the ability to say, hey, I know how to do this. Do you want me to help you? I mean, I'd say that now.
Yeah.
But then I just let him help me, even though I knew the stuff, because I didn't know how to say...
How we have come of age.
Yeah. And then, so I've got all that behind me. I've done really well in my degree.
That's the last century stuff. Any other pearls of wisdom from the last century?
My first job interview...
Yeah.
While I was still at university, as I was sitting down, one of the guys on the panel said to me, of course you realise you're at the bottom of the list. I went, oh.
No further to fall. Brilliant.
I've never had a job. I've been at university, I've never had a job. And I said, oh. And he said, look, you got married. I got married for the first time while I was still at university.
Oh, right.
And you got married, you have a husband to support you, and there are a lot of men applying for this role, and we need to give them the opportunity to have a family. Now, I think that sort of sentiment...
You are from the last century. Hopefully those people don't exist anymore. They do.
No, I think that there is an element of it, but it's very covert now. It was overt then. I could tell you story after story.
Yeah, I've got a few too. And that wouldn't be about competition. That would be about, can you believe? Yeah. Yeah. Wow. There we go. You've also said on respect, you said we want respect, but sometimes it's easier or safer to be liked.
Yeah.
We touched on this earlier, but why is it? We didn't delve in as far as I'd like to go. Why is it sometimes safer to be liked than respected?
Safer in order to fit in and not create a wave.
Okay.
So let's say you see something in your social group or perhaps in your workplace and you just think, I don't really like how that person's talking to the other person, or that's not a really funny joke. There's a bit of a barb at the end of that joke, There's a put down of someone or a group of people at the end of a joke. And sometimes the respect would be, hey, that's not funny. What do you mean by that? Or... that's lazy humour. There's a way of dealing with it that we would deal with it in that way now, I would think.
Yeah.
But to stand up and say you're not funny to someone who might be a bit of a leader in the social group at work or whatever, or someone who's got the power of whether you've got a job or not, got to fit in.
That's where I've gone wrong. I've poked too many bears in my life.
You and me both, Di. You and me both. Yeah. I have poked bears, and so I've not ascended in the typical way of getting promotions in organisations. I think that I've not been aggressive, but I've chosen
But you've
not...
been yourself.
Yeah,
and
I've
that
chosen
I
not
totally
to
respect.
be...
That's why I always liked you the minute I met you.
Di. Well, you certainly stood out yourself.
And here we are.
Here we are, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, where do respect and trust intersect? That's a interesting intersection.
Let me start about talking about one of the key reasons people are not trusted that quite surprises them when I sort of join the dots. So I'll try and join the dots quickly. If you're passively defensive and you have a need to be liked, that where the unconscious thing going around in your head is in order for me to fit in, I need to be liked. And someone says to you, oh, what's your opinion on X, Y, and Z? And there's this unconscious desire to be liked by that person, you're more likely to tell the person what you think they want to hear.
But can I trust what they're going to say because it's
That's right.
politically motivated or...
So you're not going to be trusted
tempered.
to be able... So if I said to you, Di, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? And
I'll tell you.
I know, but if you were trying to be liked by me, you might not say it to the extent that you actually believe it. You might not want to be the bearer of bad news, and you'll not approach me and say, "Hey, Desley, you need to know this." So what happens is I learn that I can't trust you.
Yeah.
And the alternate to that is if you told me what I asked you, and I was mature enough not to be defensive and take offence at what you said. Like, oh, look, Desley, I thought that the way you presented this at the meeting didn't go across very well. And I was able to say, oh, thank you. Thank you for telling me that. I will respect what you said to me, but then you will respect me for not getting defensive.
Yeah.
This is the dance. The other dance around respect is if I've got this insecurity around not being good enough, because I am overgeneralising here, and I'm not kicking the boot into parents or teachers, but in order to get praise and feel loved, I need to be a high achiever. So in order for me to feel okay about myself, I need to be better than you, which is a competitive mindset. So if I've come to ask you for help and I feel... This is dark stuff, right?
Yeah.
I feel, and I'm not consciously aware of it, but I feel that I need to be better than you. I don't want you to be better than me.
So I'm only going to tell you only so much.
Yeah, and you can get a sense of whether this plays out in you. And I've felt the tugs of this in myself from my own upbringing and childhood.
But you've seen this as, and I think I always say nothing crueler than girls in the schoolyard.
Yeah.
And that was all of that, all the time, constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah. And you can feel the tug of it. And here's an example of it. Someone has done something really well that you think that you've done just as well, if not better, and they're getting the recognition for it. And the tug is...
Can I tell them they've done a great job?
Oh, no. Do I feel good? Do I feel happy for them? That's the tug. That's the tell. Yeah, and
not able to celebrate somebody's success.
Yeah, and that's the early tell that often is there in teens and 20s and beyond. And again,
some never grow out of it.
Yeah, well, it's in all of us, Di. It's still in us, actually. But the thing is, if I ever get a sense of it, and I have to say, it's sleeping. That and the need to be liked is sleeping in me. But if I get a sense of it, I just smile because I've noticed it. There it is.
Yeah, you know how to lean into it or
and that's how I support
it.
people to get around it. And when you say to people that these are the things that have been written on you as you've been a child growing up by our competitive, materialistic society, that you need to make it.
Yep.
It's not enough just to exist. You need to be a high achiever. Then if you notice it, you'll notice it after you've said something or thought something, but eventually you'll notice it beforehand.
Yeah.
And don't self-flagellate. Just smile at yourself.
Yeah, isn't that great? Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you so much. A couple of questions that are typical to Power of Women that I'd like to put out, and I can't wait for your response on this one. what's a phrase that defines you?
My best is yet to come.
You've already said it earlier.
That's right, yeah.
And you believe it, and I believe it in you.
I believe it in you, Di. I've seen you metamorphose through 30 years of being in touch every now and again.
Yeah.
And congratulations for the power of women.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I can't tell you what a privilege it is to have you sitting here talking with me on it. That's
My
brilliant.
privilege, Di.
If you were to pay forward all the knowledge and wisdom you've amassed from your lived experience to offer somebody else, what would it be?
Now, I thought long and hard about that question, and all I could come up with is, because this is where my head goes all the time, is we're just stardust.
We're just stardust.
Yeah.
So we don't matter that much. Get over ourselves?
Well, I think this is the big view of we're stardust, we're full of holes. You know, the more we find out about matter, I guess it's be as objective about ourself as possible.
Yeah, love it.
Be big picture. And that's where I go when I feel the pressures of the everyday stuff.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm just stardust. Yeah.
So if you're going to sprinkle some of that stardust, if somebody's looking for your services or your business, how do they find you and Aberrant Learning?
Well, you can look up my name. I've got a website, and that'll direct you also to aberrant.com.au.
And we'll put it on the show notes as well for
Fabulous,
today.
yeah.
So, brilliant. Cool. Thank you, Desley. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Chocolate Studios for this fabulous space in which we sit. I'd love you to help me power the pod, so please follow, subscribe, share. You can also engage with me on LinkedIn and Instagram, or connect with me directly on my website, powerofwomen.com.au. Until next time.